The sixth EU-AU summit concluded its two-day meeting on Friday. Heads of government of member states met in Brussels. Now, some say that the meeting managed to thaw the frigid relations between the nations because of COVID-19, a vaccine hoarding saga. Others, including Oxfam, is disappointed that no concrete commitments were made. Let's get reaction from One Campaign's Executive Director, Edwin Ikhuoria. Thank you very much for your time this morning, Edwin. I mean, just based on your analysis over the two-day meeting that did take place, what would you say were some of the overall salient features that were ventilated by the member states?
I would say some of the results of this summit were really frustrating. Some sticking points like the temporarily waiving the vaccine IP patents. You know, it really made us wonder why we are still arguing 2 years down the line, when this really comes down to people's lives. You know, the question is, are the lives of Africans really worth less than the impact of innovation and profits from pharmaceutical companies? So those are some of the things that are really frustrating us. And the other announcement around the global gateway investment of 300 billion euros that was announced, late last year and early this year, for which 50% of that has been earmarked for African countries. Now, the question here is that we haven't really seen, what a plan is in terms of, is this real new money, or is this recycling old commitments that have been made, and exactly what are the projects that this will go into? What are the specific investment that will be going to? The announcement is that this will be worked out. The details will be worked out in the coming future. But they identified some systems like supporting healthcare investments and vaccine delivery. But even with all of this, we still felt that some of the important issues like, collectively committing to recycle the special drawing rights. This was the IMF's allocation to all the countries during this pandemic, but no commitment was made in that regard. It looks like individual member states are doing their own making discretionary choices on what to commit in terms of recycling. But African countries are in serious debt, and they need this liquidity to be able to come out of this pandemic and recover, sustainably. And those are the frustrations we have in terms of whether this is real partnership or otherwise.
No, it's a very interesting argument that you raised there. And one wonders, as you talk through some of the non-commitments that were made at this meeting, whether it's nothing but a talk shop, because we wonder, why is it that concrete decisions and directions are not able to be taken between the member states over the 2 days? Essentially, we're just looking at a talk shop that happens on an annual basis.
The question really is that they made some announcements. So the question, I wouldn't say it is completely talk shop. They made some announcements, and those announcements are great if we really see the plans behind them, if we see how this will be translated, because it's not the first time they're making an announcement. They made an announcement in 2017 when they had the last summit. Announcements were made, but we didn't see any tangible outcome out of those announcements. So the question is, what is different now? And that's what we're all looking forward to see. What exactly is different now? And because especially the reason why people are a bit concerned is that we are in a pandemic. We expected that this summit will be a time to decisively make a collective commitment to end the pandemic, based on the needs of African leaders and African countries. President Cyril Ramaphosa was very clear in terms of, look, we do not want to be dependent on the rest of the world for vaccines forever. We want to be able to produce our own vaccines. And the IP waivers would have been a major commitment to that long-term strategic interest. But that they couldn't get an agreement on that. So beyond talk shop, it's just about, there's not actual demonstration of the serious partnership that we are hoping that this time around things will be different. That's the main issue here.
What about the argument that perhaps things are, or the wheels are moving a little bit slower than they usually would, and especially being made worse by the advent of the pandemic, and that things might start to see some change in the coming medium to long term?
That's our expectation. We are hoping. Nobody's praying for this to fail, right? We are hoping that it gets, things take off. And on the basis of this, so we would really be happy to see that things move differently, and that the pandemic is over, and that nations are making the commitments whether bilaterally or multilaterally. But what we want to see is concrete action taking place post this announcement. And that's what people like us at the One Campaign are really focused on. We will be following up, we'll be holding them accountable, we'll be screaming at the top of our voices to make sure that this announcement are not just announcements, but they translate to real projects on the ground and that lives are really changed and transformed.
Yeah, that's a very important point you raise, and it wants me to go back to one that you made in a previous answer around the fact that African states are in deep debt. And the problem, we find South Africa being an example, we continue to borrow, and the initiatives around assisting African states to create sustainable balance sheets is not actually happening. What we're doing instead is we're going to these multilateral lenders and we continue to borrow huge amounts of money at the detriment of growing an economy throughout the African continent. This is a common issue.
Very correct. And that's and the reality is that it's the same thing all over the world. So it's not just an African problem. The problem we have on the African continent is that we are borrowing at exorbitant rates. We are borrowing mainly from commercial lenders and we are getting downgraded every day, every year. We get downgraded. The credit rating agencies downgrade African economies. And so we borrow at very high rates. For this pandemic alone, in terms of response to the pandemic, the developed countries spent, close to 70% of their GDP to be able to, respond in terms of trillions of dollars that they had to borrow to respond to the pandemic. Africans could not afford that because the money just wasn't there for us to borrow or to access. And that's why there has been a debt problem before the pandemic, but the pandemic really worsened the situation. And so there were initiatives that are supposed to help, relieve Africans, from the burden of debt repayment. But those initiatives are closed, like the DSSI, the Debt Service Suspension Initiative that started. It ended in December last year. And so many African countries have to use a huge part of their revenue to pay debts going forward. And these are the reasons why we are saying that, one, there has to be a sustainable way for Africans to be able to finance themselves, because fiscally, there's a major problem across the world. It's not just an African country. But this sustainable financing should mean that we should not get downgraded, at will, because it makes us to borrow at very high rates. So we have to find a way of getting money cheaply. That's number one. But number two is that we have to tie borrowed money to specific tangible projects that will change lives, that are self-sustaining, not borrowing money to a recurrent expenditure or borrowing money for white elephant projects. Those are the kind of issues that we are currently fighting, to say we have to be transparent. We have to know exactly where the monies borrowed are being used and how they can be paid back. Otherwise, we will continue to have this conversation for a very long time to come.
Yeah, and that's key to sustainability, Edwin, and that was one that I wanted to touch on next in terms of funding or that would come through from the European countries. You spoke about the 300 billion euros that was promised to African economies a while back. The projects that this kind of money should be focusing on to start to spearhead that sustainable growth across the continent, what would you point out as key projects that would create that sustainable growth and where that money should be directed?
Thank you. In fact, this is the core of our question. The first thing is that Africa needs jobs, right? The young people need to get employment. There are tons, about 15 million young people get into the job market every year on the African continent. So any investment that does not go into the building of jobs or creating of jobs for young people, for us, would be considered to be, not viable, not the best. But the commitment in the announcement also identify that there are some projects, what you call the PIDA2 project that the African Union NEPAD has been, facilitating, which are very fantastic projects that try to bring regional integration and cross-continental infrastructure projects. Those kind of projects are fantastic because they will enable the CFTA, the Continental Free Trade Area, to work. And if they do that, it means more businesses will open up and have access to larger markets. And we are hoping down the line, this will translate to jobs. So that is well identified. But the question really is that through what means are we going to be making this investment? Is it going to be by European companies in their own decision, or is it going to be through African institutions that decide what this investment will be important, that are important for us? Which investment and where they go to has to be done by African institutions who know exactly where it pinches us. It cannot be decided by Europeans. It cannot be decided by people sitting down in Brussels or in other capitals across the world. So that is the first thing. The second thing is that there's climate change everywhere. We're hoping that this kind of investment will help to catalyze sustainable projects that can produce jobs in the green sector. Because again, Africa needs a lot of investment to be able to do that, because that itself has a major potential to create more jobs. So we're hoping that these two areas, and then of course, health investment. We do not want to be in a place where the next pandemic, Africa is scrambling, Africa is at the back of the queue, to make these things happen, to respond to pandemics. So we're hoping that there will be some significant investment in the health sector that would enable us to respond when there's a next health pandemic. But the last thing I would say here is that given all of these things, we are hoping that by now, there should be cheap money available through the recycling of SDRs. But those announcements was not made. We are hoping that Europe could come up and say we will recycle 25% or 20% of our allocated SDRs, because they are lying down fallow. They are not even being used. But Africa that needs this money is not getting access to them. And so that's one of the things we hope that would have been a more tangible outcome that is immediate, that we can then begin to see how African leaders can access this money and invest in the right sectors. So we are hoping that it's a whole package, but the key sectors are sectors that are transformative, sectors that can create jobs for Africa's young people.